Let's start.
All right, glad to be here. Thank you.
Jacob, thanks. This one's very much on the nose of what I'm talking about, reporting on all the time. Many people in this book are my acquaintances.
Oh, well, apologize to them for me, maybe.
Acquaintances, not friends. But in a way, this story is about what happens when a community that you thought you understood suddenly tips in a direction that you didn't expect.
Yes.
Which could play out in our local communities in a lot of ways. Tell me, in a nutshell, what is it that you think happened in broader America and society and politics that caused some of these independent thinking, underdog positioning, in some cases countercultural, gay entrepreneurs to align themselves with Trump and politics that didn't seem to be associated with Silicon Valley?
So that's really what the book is about, is how do we get to this place in the 2024 election, or even if you watched the inauguration when you had Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and other tech CEOs all lined up together, how do we get to that place? And I argue that there are a few different paths that some of these individuals have taken. They're not all the same. Some of them, like if you've heard of Peter Thiel or now David Sachs, who works in the White House, these are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives for many years. But someone like Elon Musk, who's obviously a big part of the book, and some of the other people around him, I think we saw a pronounced shift to the right, also just a change in their priorities and public behaviors and rhetoric at times. And I try to trace some factors in the culture, in politics, especially in the last 5 years. I mean, I think we saw a lot of political and social changes and upheaval beginning with COVID. It didn't necessarily begin then, but that's kind of one mile marker I use. And you might have seen this in your own community, among people you know, people who had political transformations or had a kind of a bad reaction to the COVID lockdowns and quarantine measures, or people who simply don't believe in the reality of COVID or vaccines or things like that. I mean, just to take Elon Musk, he said that COVID was going to be gone by the end of April of 2020. And so what I think happened with some of these billionaires especially is you had issues around COVID, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, other social movements that they didn't really tolerate or recognize. This is a form of progressive politics that they really didn't like. And especially when they saw some of those issues going through their companies, I think that's when that reactionary sentiment really started bubbling up. For example, when you had Elon Musk arguing with Alameda County in California about keeping his main Tesla factory open, that became a real flashpoint for him and his kind of growing conflict with the state and with the Biden administration. Someone like Mark Andreessen, who's a very big venture capitalist and billionaire, some of you might know his name, I think actually in some of his own statements really reflects the kind of transformation we witnessed, which is that he has said a couple different things that I think are interesting. He said, for one, that he said this publicly, that he thought that young people straight out of college, often trained in computer science or other tech skills, were getting jobs at big tech companies in order to destroy them from within, and because they had all become very far left and hated big tech. And that kind of, I think that was very representative of some of the attitudes that have changed. I mean, there's the kind of the paranoia, there's the mistrust of institutions, because a lot of these guys think colleges are turning their kids into Marxists. That's another thing that Bill Ackman has said, the financier. So, just to shortly sum it up, I think we had a lot of turbulence in the culture and the economy and in politics, and frankly, I think these very powerful men didn't always respond so well, and it makes a big difference though when it's a billionaire versus when it's one of us not really happy with the status quo.
And they are almost all men.
That's right.
The people who are factoring into this shift. And it seems to me like there are a couple of different moments that they represent from internet culture. So it's sort of well known in Silicon Valley that there's some subsets of the valley that are more conservative, like in the chip business, for example. Semiconductors, there tend to be some names. But in the Gen X version of things, You had the web revolution. Mark Andreessen was the Netscape guy, who popularized the web browser, so that was pretty important. Some of the other people you're talking about were part of what's called the PayPal mafia,
Yes.
who sort of got online payments relatively safe and commerce going. Elon Musk
Yeah.
and Peter Thiel are a couple of those people. Ben Horowitz, who's with Mark Andreessen in the venture capital game, especially seemed to be part of the culture, right? Like the more left-leaning progressive culture.
Yeah, Ben Horowitz is a famous venture capitalist who's partners with Mark Andreessen. Their firm is one of the most important in the Valley. Actually, a little interesting note with him, his father is a man named David Horowitz, who was a big lefty radical in the 60s, then had his own transformation to the right wing, more neocon, and became a big kind of anti-campus politics guy. So, it runs in the family in some ways. But Ben Horowitz was certainly more of a progressive liberal in a lot of ways and a Democratic Party supporter. I remember there was one piece, I believe, in the San Francisco Standard, which sort of talked about interviewing some people around him, sort of proposing that he and his wife kind of moved inward, kind of spent more time in their mansions during COVID, reflecting some of the transformations I think happened. And now what you hear from him is he became a huge Trump supporter in the summer of 2024. And he also, I think, reflects a little more of an authoritarian attitude that you see among some of these guys, and that's something that I write about in the book. For example, Ben Horowitz now, one thing he started doing is he's a big supporter of the Las Vegas Police Department, and instead of holding a fundraiser or writing some articles or something like that, what he does is he buys equipment from companies he invests in, like drones, surveillance technology, and then he gives that to the Las Vegas Police Department. It's almost a kind of vertical integration. He's helping his investments while helping kind of further this kind of draconian law and order program in Las Vegas. And this is something we see happening in other cities too. Chris Larson, who's a cryptocurrency billionaire and had another startup before that. He has been known as a Democratic supporter, but he has a whole network of private surveillance cameras in San Francisco that he allows the San Francisco PD access to. He's actually just sponsored a new operations room for the San Francisco PD, which I believe is in a Trump-owned building as it happens. So, it's not always electoral politics, as we're talking about, is a huge part of it. But it's also about, the kinds of policies these guys support and the ways in which, they've become much more pro-law enforcement. Or even just the other day, we heard Mark Benioff say, and he was Mr. Liberal San Francisco, he said he would like Trump to send in the National Guard to San Francisco. So I think that's another way in which we're seeing it play out a lot.
But then he took it back.
Nominally, I would say, yes. He certainly backpedaled. But I think it is illustrative of some kind of change on his part. And, maybe the fact that he doesn't live full-time in San Francisco anymore is part of that, too.
Interesting libertarian strain running through this group. Used to be left-tilting libertarian. And the author Ayn Rand, popular in this group. Some of us read Rand as teenagers, and maybe we're besotted for a moment with objectivism, the Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. What's the basic idea and worldview that that comes out of that strain of libertarianism, and how does it play out with this group of tech billionaires?
Well, there's certainly the ego and the idea of a kind of an individual male greatness, I think, that summoning a new world or creating something all on your own. I mean, the most hallowed word in Silicon Valley is probably founder, the most hallowed identity, And but more than that, it's kind of this desire to be left alone, even though their businesses often depend on billions of customers or support from the government. And it's also, the word you hear a lot is exit. This is a word that Peter Thiel uses and a lot of other kind of libertarian-infused tech people, is that they really want to exit from mainstream society. And that means either Peter Thiel used to sponsor building what was called seasteading, these floating kind of city-states that never really got off the ground, but now they're trying to do what are called charter cities, where they essentially seize sovereignty on behalf of a corporation from somewhere with weak government. So this is happening in Honduras. There's sort of a related kind of thing going on in Solano County in the East Bay of California, and it's really a desire to be free from the strictures of mainstream society. I mean, Peter Thiel talks about exiting, but he also means it somewhat literally, like he wants to get his money out of the country, and he says that it's a lot harder to open a Swiss bank account. For Musk, the exit is partially building his own company town in Texas, but it's also getting off Earth and going to Mars, something that I think is impossible, and the astrophysicists I talk to say is impossible, but that's the libertarian instinct, is that they want to feel unfettered. They don't want to be part of society. And increasingly, I think, and this relates to what I write in the book, and especially the last 5 years, there's a real misanthropy and antisocial quality to these people, where they may have been kind of libertarians in an intellectual sense for a number of years. I think now, especially you can see it in the attitude that they have towards San Francisco, that they don't want to be around the rabble. They don't want to be around other people, and they don't want to try to fix America's urban centers, starting with San Francisco. They want something that's their own, that they can control.
I contrast this with the Silicon Valley that I first got to know at a personal level. I moved out there in 1999, right before Y2K. And back before Steve Jobs got his cancer diagnosis, I was covering Apple, and I remember people would say out in Palo Alto, around this time of year, kids would go to trick or treat at the Jobs house in Palo Alto. And they would answer the door and hand out good candy. At Steve Jobs, and this is the CEO, co-founder of Apple. That's kind of weird. But then at the same time, which seemed more normal at the time, you've got Atherton, a town not far, High Hedges, the Andreessen used to live there at least. And it's eerie because you don't see cars parked on the street. There's no trick-or-treating because you can't even see the houses. You just see high hedges everywhere. And that was more sort of, it seemed like normal. People would want to protect themselves. But Silicon Valley seems to have shifted a lot more toward the Atherton model and away from trick-or-treating at Steve Jobs' house.
That's a very interesting comparison. Yeah, even in Atherton in particular, which is a very nice town, there was a vote a few years ago, I don't remember exactly when, but I believe some sort of public ballot measure to basically change the zoning code to build more multifamily housing. And a lot of the locals, including, I believe, Mark Andreessen and his billionaire heiress wife, vote against that. And one reason why that's a little bit funny or ironic is that a lot of these tech people, including Mark Andreessen himself, complain about the difficulty in building more housing and building more dense housing in San Francisco and elsewhere. So, and Mark Andreessen is actually one of the investors in this plan to build a new city in Solano County, which is supposed to solve the housing crisis. But you see, given a chance closer to home to vote on something that would slightly alter their community but build more housing, they choose no. But I think you're right that there was certainly more of an accessibility of some of these people. Steve Jobs would answer emails sometimes from regular folks. That was his prerogative, I suppose. But for years, people have been talking about, economists talk about inequality, about how the ultra rich were retreating into gated communities, or they take helicopters, or they're driven everywhere. And I think we've seen just an intensification of that kind of withdrawal. And they're being, as a consequence, they are less in touch, I think, with everyday people.
How much of this is just getting old with money? Right? There's that saying out there, if you're young and you aren't liberal, you don't have a heart, but if you're old and you're not conservative, you don't have a brain. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that's true, of course, but is some of this that? They're getting old with money and suddenly they're turning into their parents?
There could be a little bit of that. I do wonder about that. Someone else was also interviewing me the other day, and he said, I wonder how much of this is a little bit of a, is this all there is attitude among them, which is, I think, goes along with getting older. Some of these guys did very interesting or even revolutionary things in their youth, like Andreessen. He helped create the web browser. And then, there's a way in which people get older. Perhaps some of them get more set in their ways. I think also, especially with these guys, there's a feeling that they have done a lot, that they have created amazing things, and that they're unappreciated. And they really don't, especially after 2016, when Trump was elected for the first time, you started seeing more scrutiny of social media, how algorithms influence what we see, how it can affect the political process. The tech industry did not take that very well. Mark Zuckerberg certainly didn't like being a punching bag, but more broadly, a lot of these billionaire VCs and CEOs, I think they thought that they were too put upon, and they see them, and they don't take that kind of criticism very well. Even I think in comparison to some other industries like finance or the oil industry or something like that, which knows that there's, it comes with the territory a little bit. And that's what I think distinguishes tech a little bit, is they really don't want anyone standing in their way. They don't, when some tech person, especially someone who's been in the game a long time, hears me or someone writing the New York Times critiquing what they're doing, I think that is very unwelcome, and it gets treated with a lot of offense. I mean, Mark Andreessen has blocked me multiple times on Twitter, and I don't think I've ever even talked to him directly. So there's a real sensitivity there.
He does like to block people quite
Yes.
a bit. I don't know how to feel about the fact he hasn't blocked me yet.
Well, maybe he likes a little more what you have to say. I don't know.
No,
No, probably.
maybe I'm talking less about anything political. Maybe.
There you go.
How does this desire to exit fit in with the narrative behind crypto
Sure.
and the idea that cryptocurrency protects one from government instability, from overspending on things that don't matter and are going to devalue a currency?
Well, I think I go back to first principles in some ways. I've been writing about crypto and looking at it for a long time. My last book I co-wrote with someone about crypto and fraud, and talked to a lot of people. And my sort of first principle is that I think money should generally be the province of the government and governed by some political process. I think it's very imperfect here. I probably don't have Trump's view of the Fed, but we don't necessarily have a democratic monetary system, but it's one that I much prefer to private money being minted by very sketchy companies. I mean, some of them are more compliant or legitimate or within the law than others, but who can often mint tokens whenever they want, and there's just sort of this free-for-all and an incredible amount of fraud and market manipulation and corruption that goes with it. So I see why they've done it. I mean, since he founded co-founded PayPal, Peter Thiel has talked about having a form of money that is separate from the state. And then when I think you
And in some areas of the world, that's been really good.
Let me address that. Yeah, I should address that. It has been useful to some people, especially in areas with very high inflation or kind of runaway economies, or even during after Russia fully invaded Ukraine a few years back. I actually spoke to someone in tech who was paying software engineers in Ukraine with Tether stablecoins. So there are potential uses. I feel like a lot of those uses end up being ones that we'd hope are temporary. These are people living in Lebanon or Turkey or Argentina, somewhere with crazy inflation or a war zone. I don't necessarily see crypto and these parallel financial networks as places, things that could be sort of enduring alternatives that hopefully have the kind of stability and rule of law that we're looking for. It often feels like people who are in a very rough situation economically, especially overseas, turn to one of these cryptocurrencies because it is a slightly less bad option for them, or perhaps in that moment. So that's sort of my opinion of how crypto might work for folks overseas. And a lot of these countries like Nigeria and elsewhere, Nigeria tried to go after Binance. They do see crypto as a threat to their own monetary sovereignty, their own economy. And sometimes that might be the fault of the home country for not managing their economy very well. But that's the kind of conflict that I think will continue. Even Trump, during his first term, before he famously changed his mind, said that he thought Bitcoin was a scam and it competed with the dollar. And I actually think there's something to that. And I think that kind of tension.
Maybe he didn't change his mind so much as change his perspective on
There you go.
what the potential of that scam really is.
Yes, and I think what we're seeing, thank you. Yeah, what we're seeing now, and what I'm writing I mentioned this in the book a bit, but what I'm writing about, I mentioned how he changed his perspective in the book, which is that he had a meeting with Jeffrey Yoss, he had meetings with some of the people around TikTok. Jeffrey Yoss was how he changed his mind about TikTok. That's a different billionaire, but all the people around him, and especially his sons, I assume said, hey, you can make a lot of money here, Dad. This is very low overhead. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to sign any shoes or anything like that. And then they got going during the last election cycle and founded World Liberty Financial and some other crypto ventures. But now what I think we're really seeing, and this is why I've been writing about more lately, I had a piece in the New York Times recently about this and elsewhere, is I think crypto has really emerged as a tool for political corruption. I mean, people always talk about what's the use case, and sometimes it's a use case as a kind of bridge currency in unstable economies like we're talking about. We know that the main use cases so far have been buying drugs, money laundering, sanctions evasion, and now it's really coming into its own as a form of political corruption, because we're seeing people pay, well, the Trump family or companies in which the Trump family has interests, like World Liberty Financial, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for crypto products that really have very little value and are no different than any of the other ones out there. The difference is that they have the Trump name attached to them. And so that's what really concerns me now, is that anyone, like, we could give money to Trump right now. We could just send it to one of his crypto wallets. It's really easy. But also, if you're a prince in the UAE, which we just saw, you can do a $2 billion deal with Trump's crypto company. I mean, I have reported on people who are confirmed criminals, a guy who pled guilty to fraud in Russia, and he's sent at least $20 million to World Liberty Financial. So this is what scares me now, and it's what we're seeing play out, I mean, pretty much every single day.
So where do you think this is headed as it relates to people's relationship and trust in institutions? That seems to be a common thread, whether you're looking at cryptocurrency and not trusting monetary policy and the governors of that. If you're looking at how people felt in COVID about the mandates and vaccines. If you look across various aspects of this, there seems to be maybe an erosion of trust in institutions and more popular trust in billionaires, with their money being a signal of intelligence or success?
Yeah, a surprising amount. I mean, one thing we've heard in both election cycles, I think, first about Trump and then about Trump and Musk, is, oh, he's so rich he can't be bought. You know, which my response to that is, you know, their wealth is a sign that their entire lives are driven by money and that they are deeply transactional people. And as we've learned, especially in this generation, people who are very rich just want more. I mean, Musk says he needs $1 trillion because that's how he'll get people to Mars. I mean, never mind the foolhardiness of the journey, but it becomes this justification, of course, to hoard as many resources as possible. But the institution side, I think, is really important. One reason why MAGA is ascendant is because people in general across the political spectrum don't trust institutions, and often for good reason. It may not be because you don't trust the vaccine, but it may be because you hate the private healthcare system, or maybe maybe because universities now cost, as much as a luxury car for just 1 year of study. Like, it may be the police, it may be any number of things, and there are reasons from the left or the right, I think, to be dissatisfied with our politics and our political institutions and some of our civic institutions too, and with both political parties. What the tech elites and Trump and MAGA did effectively was that they played on that mistrust, and they cast these institutions as the enemy, as deserving of destruction. And in some ways, they didn't have to sell a popular program. They just had to say that everyone was lying to you and that all these institutions and politicians wanted the worst for you. And I think that over the long term, that might pose a problem for actually governing. People will, the kind of discontent will bubble up again or start being redirected towards MAGA itself. But that's a powerful motivator. And I think the problem on the Democratic side, or even the more liberal tech side, was there wasn't a counter argument made. There wasn't even acceptance that, hey, we've got a lot of problems, or some of our institutions aren't doing so hot. One thing, frankly, that we heard from Biden and his allies, or Kamala Harris and their allies, is that actually, the American economy is doing quite well, and we should be sort of thankful for how we're doing. And to a lot of people, that doesn't speak to them. People have economic issues of their own, and so I think to solve this, really, we have to find ways, one, to refurbish our institutions if the current people are ever out of power. But you have to make positive cases for reform and for how, whether it's government or civil society or even these tech companies, can help individuals. And right now, we purely have that reactionary, right-wing negative sentiment going on very strongly and very much ascendant. And I think we need something more positive and forward-looking to counter that, especially when the tech industry talks about how they're the industry of the future. I think we can have a forward-looking sensibility and a forward-looking politics that doesn't engage in their kind of doomerism or even their bigotry sometimes.
There are some threads in this community of Gilded Rage of actual, unabashed, anti-democratic ideas.
Yeah, small d democratic. Yeah.
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 The idea that really everybody shouldn't be weighing in on this. It's better for one executive to sort of be in charge and be able to fix these things, whether it's me and the city that I want to create, or whether it's Trump, or et cetera. Actually, other people's votes and opinions will just get in the way.
Yeah, it is on record from some of these folks, most especially Peter Thiel, is sort of the presiding spirit in some ways of Silicon Valley conservatism, that they don't like democracy. Peter Thiel wrote an essay, I believe in 1999, where he basically called into question electoral democracy, said he prefers capitalism and freedom, which he sees as in tension with democracy. And that idea that there's sort of a tension there is, I think, a somewhat popular one among people in tech. Musk, more recently, in the last couple of years, has talked on social media about his desire for a Roman emperor. I mean, that's the kind of personality he likes, I think, or figurehead. There's a writer, not a very good one, I would say, named Curtis Yarvid, who's kind of an ideological inspiration for a lot of these guys. He wants a monarch for a king for the United States. For a little while, he hoped it was going to be Trump or Musk. More recently, he's written that it can't be Trump because somehow we don't deserve him. But this is a real idea, and or another example, Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle. Depending on how the stock market is doing that day, he's the richest man in the world next to Musk. He's probably also benefited from the new Trump administration more than anyone in this country. He's going to be the one who's going to be one of the owners of TikTok once the sale finally goes through. So Larry Ellison, besides wanting he also recently said he wants a system of mass AI-driven surveillance because then we'll all be on our best behavior. After the 2020 election, this was reported in the Washington Post, he held a strategy meeting with some other Trump operatives and other people like himself to brainstorm how to overturn the 2020 election. Obviously, this is when Trump and his allies were trying to overturn the election that brought Biden into office. So, he hasn't said publicly, I don't like democracy, but he had some phone calls about overturning a democratic election. And so you hear this in various forms from people, certainly the leadership of Silicon Valley. And I would say if you go on social media, especially on X, you hear this kind of stuff all the time, or you hear that women shouldn't vote. That's something that Peter Thiel has, in the same essay that I referred to earlier, he said that women being able to vote has kind of been harmful to the cause of libertarianism. And then once there were, people wrote in a lot of letters, and he was given a chance to apologize or follow up. I wouldn't call it an apology, what he wrote in response. It was sort of I was misunderstood. But these are ideas that are really out there. And again, we're mostly talking about powerful men, mostly white men, and they seem to believe them earnestly.
Do you think this is related at all to the idea that I believe J.D. Vance or some people in his circle have put out there that families with more children should get more votes?
Yeah, well, it does have a sort of merger with the new right, and Musk, of course, which Vance is a part of. From the Vance view and the new right view is that, and the sort of the glimmer of economic populism that they offer is that men should make more money so that women can stay home and have a bunch of kids. Like they want a sort of 50s style vision, but without unions, and where you can have a single income household and a lot of kids at home. Some of these people in tech are similar in a way. They might not invoke Christianity or in the same way, though Thiel is religious. Musk likes to talk about God.
Religious, you mentioned Thiel. He's got this thing with the Antichrist.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I would say is that there is before we get to the Antichrist,
That's a great line. Just completely out of context. Before we get to the Antichrist.
I know I walked us into that one, but. Musk, as many people know, wants to have as many children as possible. He calls them his legion. I actually have a new podcast with CBC, where we talk about this a lot, the Canadian Broadcasting, and he has most of his kids are via IVF. He has this compound that a lot of them live in Austin. He has solicited women over X who he has never met in person to carry his sperm if they want to. This is a big deal for not just Musk, but for a lot of people in tech, including people at Andreessen Horowitz, that firm, that they think that because of population decline and because they don't like immigrants, that we should have as many kids as possible, and they want to go back to these kind of old-style gender roles you're talking about.
To be clear, some of them are immigrants.
Well, that's the strange thing too. Some of these people are immigrants, but have obviously pulled up the ladder behind them.
But you said before we get to the Antichrist.
Right. So.
So is it time?
I think it's time. So for those who might not know, Peter Thiel styles himself as a bit of an intellectual, and a lot of these guys I think want to seem smart and well-rounded, or like they're get credit for things that they don't necessarily deserve. And Thiel has a tendency to go talk a lot at colleges and other public settings. And recently he gave this set of supposedly secret off-the-record speeches in California at a club there about the Antichrist and his view of it in the world. I have to admit, I have not listened to the recordings that were leaked. My guess is that he wouldn't mind that this text was out there. I mean, it is certainly part of his cultivating his mystique, but I do know that at one point he suggested that Greta Thunberg was a model for the Antichrist. So you can see where his head's at a little bit. But he also gave this very interesting interview with Ross Douthat of the New York Times, which kind of set him on this path, I think, a couple months ago. This is a video interview that you can look at the New York Times website, where Ross Douthat was talking about, well, like, look, you're this big security state contractor. You founded this company called Palantir, which basically helps kill people in war zones and compiles data and surveillance information on all kinds of people. You seem to have all these sketchy interests, and you're incredibly powerful. Maybe the Antichrist would look something a little bit like you. And he seemed stunned, and like he could not really process that information. And that's when he started saying that, the world's most famous climate activist was instead the Antichrist.
Yeah, I mean, what would the Antichrist say if asked, are you the Antichrist?
Well, yeah, perhaps they would, I don't know, is the kind of thing where you have to acknowledge it? Is that a rule?
I don't think that's in the Bible anywhere.
Oh, okay.
I've read it thoroughly a couple of times. Are we wrapping up?
Yeah. I think if
You can give it to me straight, Ariel. Q&A?
yeah.
Let's do the Q&A.
Great.
Okay. Okay. So Q&A. All right.
So we all know that the political, economic, societal stuff about these guys is frightening, potentially dangerous and damaging to our democratic, multicultural society. But I'm fascinated by the weirder personal stuff that a lot of them are into, and I'm wondering if you can talk about the wellness stuff, biohacking, plastic surgery, drug use. What is that all about?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's been a lot. Obviously, this world seems all in on AI, and one thing that I've heard Peter Thiel say is that there's nothing. They feel like there's nothing else left to invest in, which I think is an incredible lack of imagination. But one of the other things that they are investing in a little bit is life extension, because a lot of these guys think that they're going to live forever, or they want to, and they really. I don't know. If you really caught them and said, do you actually think so? Maybe they'd say no, but like this is something they are working towards. Peter Thiel has said he rejects the ideology of death. That was in a New Yorker article some years ago, as if this is some political philosophy that's been put upon all of us rather than like the fundamental feature of life. But what I think is interesting is actually they're investing in biotech and things like that. Some of it somewhat mainstream drug discovery or things like that. But a lot of that money is going towards life extension, which would or somehow uploading their brains to the cloud. And this is kind of stuff that, were it ever to succeed, would obviously only benefit a very limited group of people. And so, they are really thinking in these extreme and depending on your point of view, either utopian or very dystopian terms about the future. And I think they're thinking about it in very limited ways, that it's only going to be for them. A lot of the people we've mentioned here, actually pretty much everyone I think we've mentioned here, has some kind of compound somewhere. Mark Zuckerberg has one in Hawaii. Sam Altman has one in Ojai in California, like places where they plan to go when the S hits the fan, and where they can have survivalist supplies and guns and stuff like that. Again, I don't know if they'll be any better off than the rest of us, but they live with this idea that there's sort of an apocalypse, that there is an apocalypse coming. And of course, we live in perilous times, and it's probably going to be climate change, not the race war that Musk seems to think might happen. But that is a huge part of their thinking, I think, and the narrowness of their thinking. And then I think it is important to mention drugs. I am not close enough to these people or their circles, unfortunately, to add anything new about their drug use necessarily, though I've heard things off the record. But there's pretty good reporting in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times that I don't think they would I don't think they would publish it if they weren't pretty sure about the drug use of Musk and some other tech elites. And notice also that Musk has sued many, many people for many, many different reasons. He has never sued a paper that wrote about his drug use, and he's never sued some of the other tech elites like Dustin Moskowitz, one of the founders of Facebook, who said that he was a fraud, which I just find interesting. And that makes me think that Musk doesn't want the books of SpaceX and other private companies audited. But anyway, we know that these people do drugs, and it's one thing if you're sort of a young person doing the occasional psychedelic, like Steve Jobs talked about how that was one of the most important experiences of his life, but he said it at a graduation speech. On the other hand, what we have now, it seems men in their 50s and 60s who seem very dissatisfied with life, sort of is this all there is kind of stage of life, who are doing a lot of drugs and doing dangerous ones like ketamine, and not just at the occasional party. And I think even if you look at someone like Musk, watch an interview with him from 10 years ago, 15 years ago on YouTube. Much more measured. Just like we talk about this with some of these older politicians, watch an interview with them from 20 years ago. They're different, of course. But Musk is much more measured. Of course, he's much more interested in science and in his companies. He's not ranting about migrants invading the country and causing violence. So I think you can see these changes in these people. One last thing I'll say is, some of you may know about, there's a founder of Zappos, called this shoe company that was eventually bought by Amazon. I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, but Tony Hsieh. And he was a very well-respected, well-liked guy. People love that company. His employees love working for him. He sold his company for a few $1 billion, and he went down this path, frankly, of drug abuse and was surrounded by a lot of people, I think, were telling him yes, holding all these parties. I've spoken to people who went to his parties. There was a biography of him. And he eventually died in kind of a drug-related accident. It was really sad, but I'm not disparaging this person. It's a real tragedy, but that's the kind of path that you could potentially see some of these people going down, because they are surrounded by yes men. They all have They have far more money than Tony Hsieh ever did, and a lot of them are, I think, abusing drugs in one way or another.
So until such time that they go down this path that you just mentioned, we as regular people, how do we make sure that they don't control our lives? And what is it that we need to do? I mean, okay, so we vote, so we have to use these technologies because that's the only way to survive these days. But what other advice can you give us?
That's a great question, and it's one, frankly, I've been struggling with in some of these discussions with people, because I think it's hard. It's hard to be a conscious consumer and say, "Oh, I'm going to buy this, but not that," or "This company is good, this one's evil." One, it takes some work on your part, but it can also feel like a small gesture or ineffective when we're talking about billion or trillion dollar companies. One thing I've been thinking about is we have a general erosion of democracy that people are talking about well beyond the world of tech, but these guys are certainly part of. I think whether you're working at a local civic level to try to kind of serve your community or refurbish democratic institutions or run for office, I think that's very good. I think with tech, my hope is, and I'm trying to express this in some of the occasional conversations I might have with someone in politics, that's not frequent, but tomorrow I'll be in DC, is I think the Democratic Party especially needs to understand that some of these guys, maybe not all of them, are their adversaries, and are their political adversaries. And this is why I said especially about crypto, because even just last week you had Kirsten Gillibrand, who I think has a lot to answer for in crypto. I mean, she helped pass the Genius Bill, which, just to be short, will help Trump make more money in his crypto businesses. I mean, it's simple as that. They're enabling Trump's corruption with crypto. So I hope they'll start perhaps by finding a common line there. But I think, we need to find ways to contest their power and find ways to encourage Democrats or put Democrats into office who will contest their power. We can still have very rich people in this country, but I would hope that they're taxed more and that their power is really contested. That was one of the refreshing things about the Biden administration. Lena Khan at the FTC was an incredibly effective public servant who I think, even in retrospect, might have done some things that helped the tech industry. In promoting competition and things like that, and she was certainly good for workers. So I think we can't be afraid to challenge them, whether it's rhetorically or to encourage our politicians to. And for a long time, there will be some swinging back, assuming we have normal elections in 2026 and 2028, and someone like Mark Zuckerberg is going to change his personality yet again. But there are some, we've crossed lines, or this industry has crossed lines that weren't crossed before in terms of this fusion of the corporate sector and the highest levels of governance and the kind of corruption that's been introduced. And we can't just forget about that, and the Democratic Party can't just forget about that. They have to do something about it.
Thank you for coming and having the discussion, but I must say, this is a policy issue. We made a policy change 50 years ago to go down this road. So this is not a mystery that we have rich people.
Oh, sure.
We didn't text them. So we are with these people now, right? I mean, America was successful when the tax rate was 75, 80%. And you didn't have bored people doing drugs at the top, right? So
Howard Hughes, maybe.
well, so my question is, you're talking about these people like enamored with them in a way, but not really addressing how they got there.
Well, I think I don't think I'm enamored with them necessarily. I would certainly be glad to go back to Eisenhower era tax rates because and the union membership levels of that time. I am very much in favor of a wealth tax, or even one of the things that set these guys off actually during the Biden administration was there was talk of doing a tax on unrealized capital gains, which never happened. But Mark Andreessen, for his part, said that there was a red line for him. And yeah, I think the easiest way to diminish these guys' power or contest their power is to tax them more, to have a wealth tax, to return to higher tax brackets. I also think that a lot of them have broken the law in one way or another. I mean, when you may have seen Musk's interview with Tucker Carlson before the election, and he said, if she wins, I'm effed. And he said, I'm going to prison. I wonder if they'll let my kids visit me. I don't think he was entirely joking. I don't think it's likely that a Democratic administration or DOJ is going to prosecute Musk, but Musk, you might have even seen, there's a New York Times article, there's something like 12 to 14 different investigations, civil and criminal, into Musk's various companies. I mean, even David Sachs invested in a company whose CEO got arrested last summer because it turned out to be a pill mill. All these people have, from securities law violations potentially to some of the crypto stuff, like there was a lot going on here that if we really cared about governance and tamping down corporate power, like, some of these people in a future administration would be prosecuted or, face serious civil penalties.
I'm observing that generally these billionaires are motivated by fear. And what is that they are most afraid of?
That's a good question. Well, I think for one thing, they're afraid of losing their power and privilege and their place in this hierarchy that they dominate in the tech industry, and that means money. I think on a more personal level, there is a lot of insecurity among these people. Someone like Musk seems pretty transparently insecure. I don't think they like to be laughed at or mocked, and I always do find that mockery especially in a time of rising authoritarianism, I think is a good way of dealing with these kinds of people, and satire more broadly. But yeah, I think, the most important thing to them is money, and also their ability, more specifically in some cases, to raise money. Because actually, one of the things that I actually was thinking about with your question, sir, is that one reason, and I talk about this in the book, one reason why these guys got so rich was because we had this era of zero interest rates after 2008 and the financial crisis. And some of these people are already rich or already on their way there, but they were able to borrow incredible amounts of money for basically nothing, or to raise huge fundraising rounds. It used to be that a venture capitalist would invest maybe a few $1,000,000 or even a few $100,000 in a company. And now you have, starting with Uber especially, you had multi-billion-dollar rounds. Like, with that kind of money, and I talk in the book also about how that's made them closer to Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds and dictatorships in the Middle East. But that ability to, holding on to their wealth, and then that ability to have access to huge amounts of money to make these enormous speculative bets in AI and elsewhere, I think that's probably most important to them right now.
Hi. I'm wondering what guardrails are left. It's not the tripartite system that we built. Congress is nothing. The Supreme Court is all Trump. They're violating the law. They're violating the Constitution. What can we count on? Where are we going to dig ourselves in? Where's the trench?
Yeah, that's certainly very troubling. And this is something I've written about as well, is that a lot of the guardrails or the accountability systems are gone. I mean, right after Trump took office, he fired illegally 18 inspectors general. These are the people who would normally investigate wrongdoing by various government agencies. This is someone who might, say, investigate Trump's crypto interests even, and that of his family, or how it might relate to the activities of Steve Witkoff or Howard Lutnick, government officials. And then you had this comprehensive dismantling of basically every investigatory unit into crypto in the DOJ and elsewhere. You had the kneecapping of the CFPB, and all, on and on and on, and then the passage of pro-crypto legislation. And I think your point is something deeply important, which is just that, where do we turn now? I mean, I have been a little surprised at some of the federal courts. I mean, they're not all good. Certainly the Supreme Court's bad. There are a couple federal courts that are probably not going to be friends of democracy and civil society, but there has been some pushback here. And I'm not a legal expert, but I think I also thought that they might just steamroll over the courts, especially when the Trump administration started deporting people to El Salvador, even when the court said bring them back. I also think people in the street, there are a lot of, there's some criticism of the No Kings protests, or just sort of a feel-good event. I have to admit I was busy with my children, but I think any kind of political action or awakening by people, especially by a broad public, you don't have to be a political radical, but as soon as you're out there in the street and you're interested and you're speaking, I think it's important. Also, another panel that I was on the other day, someone was speaking specifically about AI, and he's sort of an AI hater, but he said he thinks it's politically effective to just speak the truth about AI. And I like that, but I also went further. I think it's someone in one of the introductions, someone was mentioning, even the truth is up for debate now, and I think it's a political gesture now just to speak the truth in public in some ways. I mean, I watched this Elon Musk speech that he gave to Tommy Robinson, this very right-wing British political activist, very racist, in the UK. It was in September, and he did it remotely over video. It was a lot like the speeches he was giving here in the US about the great replacement, migrants coming in to change the country permanently. In the case of this speech, he was saying, violence is coming to your door, whether you like it or not. This is speaking to a crowd of middle-class British people, and telling them that migrants were coming and were going to attack them, and they had to be ready for violence. I mean, this is stuff that's clearly not true and dangerous. And I think there's so much lying from our political and business class in various ways. And, you may have to choose your battles, but I think that is really important. I mean, another conversation I had actually I went to a book festival in Wyoming, and it was kind of a mixed audience politically, and we were talking on the panel, like, we can disagree, but we have to have a shared set of facts under which to disagree. We have to have a fair political system in which our ideas can be contested fairly, no matter what you believe. And then I had a woman come up to me after the panel, and when we're talking about Trump making billions of dollars with the crypto, and she says, you know, Biden and Obama were just as corrupt. And I said, you may not like them, or there are things about them that I don't like, or I think, you know, Hunter Biden is not worth defending, but Hunter Biden was not making billions of dollars from foreign dictators and criminals. I'm sorry, that's just not a comparable fact. And so, you know, not to be too hard on that one person, but, you know, I think speaking the truth, especially in this sort of an Orwellian age we're in, can be very important, especially to people around you, because sometimes we're surprised. People in our family or friends think something that may not be true or that may strike us as a little wacko. So I think speaking the truth and reforging those kinds of connections where we can talk to other people about politics, it might not seem very practical, but I think it can be important.
So we're going to have to close pretty shortly because we did start late. So we're just going to have a few more questions.
A lot of trashing of the billionaires, which I totally understand, but I'm all for Mackenzie Scott, you know, Amazon's.
sure.
She's like the best person. I don't know if a lot of people follow what she does, but she's helped a lot of the nonprofits that I'm on.
Oh, sure.
She's a good example of what a billionaire should be like giving their money away. But what my question is about AI. You know, today in the news, UPS is laying off 30 or 40,000 people. Amazon is because of AI. Do you think AI is going to create a backlash against all these tech as more and more people, and it may be the same way like when you go back to the Gilded Age, about it got to a point that people were doing so badly, they were able to stop some of that. Do you think AI could be the thing that's going to have that type of impact because what it's doing?
I think in some ways, because I think you're referring to something very important with the layoffs, which is that you know, AI I think has some uses. I think it has more uses than crypto, but it's a very much imperfect technology. The form of it that we're often told to use now, LLMs, make stuff up and have a lot of flaws. The things I've heard are mostly that AI can be much more useful in kind of domain-specific stuff, like reading medical imagery, even though with a doctor right there. It's certainly not the cure-all yet, but I think what we're seeing is that for a lot of corporations, one, there's tremendous pressure across the Fortune 500. Everyone is supposed to be all in on AI. And then two, it's considered good enough in order to implement it widely and cut a lot of workers, I think, and with probably an assumption that this stuff will get better. I think there is a lot of room for backlash. I mean, I think you already see it in organized labor, whether the Hollywood unions or elsewhere saying like they want rights over their likeness not being able to reproduce via AI. I mean, this is something that's going to come up in every labor discussion, I think, or every union discussion going forward, almost no matter the industry. Right now, Business Insider, a publication I've written for, their union is arguing with leadership about whether they can have AI-written articles. So I think, you know, people will feel the effects of it in certain ways, whether it's, you know, someone they know goes a little crazy after talking to ChatGPT, but or they'll be we're all going to be very frustrated in the future dealing with call centers or customer service lines, which are already bad enough. But the way in which I think, yeah, it'll hit people really close to home is people are going to lose their jobs, or they're going to have to work with AI in their job, and it's going to be like this incoherent boss that's always barking orders that they don't understand. And so once it starts affecting people in that way, I think you will have pushback, or more pushback and broader, especially when people don't see how it necessarily helps them day to day. The question is, can they do something with that pushback? And that's why I say I think in the realm of organized labor, we're certainly going to see more of that kind of, and possibly more effective pushback.
So I'm really sorry, but this is going to have to be our last question.
Sorry if my answers are a little long.
So who are the billionaires, the Fortune 500, the tech leaders that are good guys at the moment? And how do we kind of marry these protests that we're all involved in and talking about to supporting their their agenda and their ability to stand up? I mean, there have to be very, very wealthy people who are terrified by this, I hope.
It's a good question. You know, there may be. I mean, I think even someone like, you know, someone like Warren Buffett says, "Hey, tax me more," but then I look at someone like Bill Gates, who's ostensibly seen as a good billionaire, and has donated a lot of his money to his own charity. He's richer than ever, and he has a lot of control over public health policy, especially in the global South. And there are plenty of people. I find his intentions good, or some of those programs are probably helpful. But there are a lot of people in the developing world, or who do development or humanitarian work, who think that someone like Gates has too much power. I am willing to. I certainly would like to hear wealthy people in this country or business elites push back against Trump or the hard right section of the tech industry. One example I mentioned in the book is that during the first Trump administration, Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, who was a Jewish guy who left the Soviet Union because Jews were persecuted there in the 80s. I have a relative who left too. He went when we had the first Muslim ban. I mean, we have one now, but people don't really seem to talk about it. But when we had the first Muslim ban, Sergey Brin went to San Francisco airport with a bunch of protesters. He wasn't making a big show of himself, but someone recognized him and interviewed him, and he said, "I'm here because I was a refugee." And very noble. And then cut to the second Trump election, Sergey Brin is now having meetings at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. They are welcome to do something if they want to. But that's why also I'm hoping for like a real populist movement. We've had a lot of years of billionaire populism and kind of false populism. One reason why Trump has appealed to people is because he has tried that. He tells everyday people, "I am your voice." He tries to, at least pays lip service to their concerns. And I would welcome pro-democratic billionaires. I think even someone like George Soros, despite how much he's demonized, has a lot of positive political programs to him. But I'm hoping that the leadership and that the real energy can come from a more mass populist movement than hoping that the kind of better billionaires will counter the worse ones. Okay.
So
Sure.
I'm so sorry, but we really, if we
Well, I'm
want
sorry if
to,
I misunderstood. I mean, the last thing I would say is we need to get money out of politics, which is going to be very hard. John McCain tried to do
Amen.
that more than 10 years ago. So, but that's also kind of, I think, a precondition for getting things back right again.